Hello, Internet. This is Kopitiam Council, and once again, I'm Haffisz and Adi. This is another episode for another week. And over the weekend, last week, a lot of things happened. We could barely catch up, and we shall go to the New York first. There's a huge meeting over there. What's happening in New York, Adi?
What can be seen happening over the past few weeks was the United Nations General Assembly, the headquarters being in New York. Now, this time the General Assembly was, you can say, quite controversial this time because of what has been transpired over the past few months or the past year and over the past 2-3 years with instability happening across the world. We can see conflicts in several different regions, and this was the place where all the grievances were aired out, where all the stances were being taken. So a lot of speeches were made, and which do you find you want to go first, Hafiz?
Let's go with the biggest one, the one that created most traction, which is Benjamin Netanyahu's speech during the United Nations General Assembly, and of course, as a a muscle memory to those who are not agreeing to him, just walk out of the room. So this is mostly people like representatives of people like Muslim countries and several others of South America. So these are immediate response, and despite all that, Bibi doesn't look very affected by it. Maybe he used to it, I guess, even in the international level. So yeah, it's something that's very expectedly going to happen. So also interestingly, in that speech, is that we got another map drawn also, like the blessing, the curse. This is Benjamin Netanyahu. And interestingly, I want to talk about the blessing map, which is included. If you just a little bit on the edge of the map, is India. And by the response on social media, you see a lot of Indians with just like, with love from India, we love Israel, we love Benjamin Netanyahu. So this is some sort of uh, kind of reactions from the Indian citizens that most of the Muslims, especially Muslims in India, saying that you have no foundation whatsoever, concrete foundation whatsoever to to be doing this. Just in fact, this is doing, despite of the very Muslims Indian in India. So again, this is connecting back to Hindutva in BJP's propaganda, and it's we can see this how local politics interact with international politics, especially what's happening. So in Middle East we have the Muslims versus the Jews, and we have in India we have the both are Indians, but one Muslims and one Hindus. So going back to the speeches, another thing that I would like to highlight from Bibi's speech again is that how he was very angry. Was very, you can sense from his tone as someone who had hold a lot of things that he waited for that moment. And true enough, 2 hours after that speech, we saw Hezbollah's leader got murdered from an airstrike from Israeli military. So yeah, we're going to talk about that in the second episode. But how about you, Adi?
Yes, reflecting on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's speech, you could see that a lot of the time, see the tone and the narrative that he was utilizing was one that's very biblical, where he recalled the story of Moses, where he said that the people of the Promised Land were either to receive a blessing or a curse. And the blessing was that to live in peace, to have your own land. The curse was to keep wandering and to keep on being harassed by enemies all around. And he used this to compare the modern situation that he thinks his country is in, where with the two maps that you pointed. So he put one, which is the blessing, which was showed their allies in the Middle East and beyond, like you mentioned, it was in India, about how this promised blessing with its allies would secure peace and stability in the region. And then going around to say the curse was entities like Syria, Lebanon, uh, Palestine, Iran was the curse that is going to, and Yemen as well, not to mention, that was going to ruin the region. But I think when it comes to this kind of language, it's obviously just hedging and dividing the region into two to show that, okay, we are supported by this and you all are just supported by that. Interestingly, mention was also made for one of their on and off allies, which was Saudi Arabia. Now we've seen that Saudi Arabia just, I think, a top official was the monarch just released a statement saying that they're not going to take in any Palestinians. Then it's not our problem to do so. And this kind of highlights the lack of commitment that Saudi Arabia has always shown and being brought to the fore to allow Israel to commit this rampant genocide, ongoing atrocities. But you are the custodians of one of the holiest sites in the religion, not to say anything about this, but to protect your interests. That kind of goes without saying. Why Benjamin Netanyahu is able to use such flagrant language, saying that we will attack, we will defeat, we will make sure that no terrorists are left to stand up against Israel. So it's more also cementing the military ambitions for Benjamin Netanyahu, and we can see those kinds of ambitions being, in a way, shifted. Their objectives being shifted towards, and now it was the Gaza Strip. Now the Gaza Strip is completely level. They are moving towards West Bank and Lebanon, like you mentioned. We will talk about this later. But this contrasts greatly to another speech I want to bring up, which was the president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, who came with a Palestinian delegation with a speech that is a huge contrast to Benjamin Netanyahu. If we compare the two, Mahmoud Abbas's speech was something less flagrant. It wasn't any way inflammatory. It was more of a seeking a cry for peace, a cry for solutions. And then, in a way, it was brought up that there were UN security resolutions to actually tackle this. And I have to commend the Palestinian Authority for coming up with a broader idea of how to go towards the road, the path towards peace here. Saying that, okay, what's going to happen the day after? And then there were a few demands that were stated out. But at the same time, there was open to discussion, open to amendment, as long as everyone is coming together to discuss these things. So, and it was just a cry and an appeal which in no way targets anybody. And I think that was a very class move from Mahmoud Abbas. There was no malice. There was no antagonism. Of course, this may be in front of the UN General Assembly. Of course, that maybe there is some kind of politics to be had here. But compared to Netanyahu, where he keeps the whoever remained, anytime that he said something decisive, there was jeering, there was roaring and support for him, even going for to show the family of the hostages that were left there. So now we have, with Mahmoud Abbas's speech, a road to peace has presented itself. Now, whether or not it's going to be deliberated, this depends on the collective will of the United Nations. So I think that, in a way, of course, we have criticized, and I think a lot of people have criticized the toothlessness of the United Nations, but we can see that there's a lot of primacy and a lot of dependence and hope placed on the United Nations to actually see these things through. So in a way, the general population may not see any hope, but a lot of leaders as well are still putting a lot of currency, a lot of value that the United Nations is the right platform to secure peace and stability in the region. So that was my take for Netanyahu and my take for Mahmoud Abbas. Of course, there were other speeches to be had.
Oh yeah, definitely. When you mentioned about many other leaders who in support of the Palestinians, this is not exhaustive list, including South African representative and few others like Malaysia himself. Minister Muhammad Hassan also reiterate what others are saying about Palestinians, and also Mulyani from Indonesia as well saying these few things, and especially from Mulyani and Muhammad Hassan. We also including Palestinian, but also the Rohingyas. The Rohingyas are also included in the speech, but I would like to see this more in ASEAN as well when they talk about this, and what's the call of action and moving forward as to bring about, because we are very good in terms of talking against the people in Palestine or against Israel, but in our own backyards, it's a different matter altogether. So again, this is what we would like to see on our leaders, especially when it comes to ASEAN affairs. Others, similarly, also President of Brazil, Adi.
Well, I just want to, because you brought up Malaysia with Muhammad Hassan, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Malaysia. But we cannot forget also a lot of the speech was motivated by the stance cultivated by our own Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim. Now, what was, I feel, the key takeaway, of course, the key takeaway is his call for peace and justice, not just in Palestine. He was calling for the same in terms of equality and the stop of abuse, rampant abuse of women and children in Afghanistan. And I think for Myanmar, they will be trying to conduct any kind of effort to proceed that ensure the 5-point consensus that they have brought up will be fulfilled. But I think just to reiterate back to the idea of how the UN still has some value. It was also the Prime Minister himself saying that multilateral frameworks, he reiterated support for multilateral frameworks like the UN, ASEAN, still being the key driver and engine for global peace and diplomacy. I remember back when, I think it was in July, there was a Q&A session at the conference that I was in, and I asked him, why would you be so against promoting multilateralism and not going towards things like minilateralism, which was the arrangement between at least 2 to 3 countries on an ad hoc basis that he did show some skepticism in the last year's speech, but he didn't mention the skepticism actually he did, but not in the flagrant way that he did last year. But he mentioned that the UN is still important. So if he feels that is still the proper channel to do so, for such things such as this, then maybe perhaps he will see it. Hopefully, he will see it through, especially when it comes to the 5-point consensus in Myanmar. Yet, maybe he should. I would recommend not discounting minilateral arrangements, because if we were to see the value in other organizations such as BIMPIAGA, bring it back to Malaysia here, or especially Sabah, perhaps there is an avenue for a new kind of diplomacy that Malaysia can cultivate. So just another thing to add when it comes to the speeches also resonate the policies that has been taken at the regional level. Sometimes when speeches are made at this international huge conference, we like to find out, we need to also see how it reflects the domestic policies and domestic positions of the member states. Haffisz, I can't hear you.
All right. This is the 79th United Nations General Assembly, Eddie. Do you think UN is still relevant? Despite, a lot of them keep saying it's still relevant. What do you think?
Well, I mean, it's only relevant depending on how it evolves and how it changes, right? I mean, in a way, the UN back then, especially in its previous reiteration, which was the League of Nations, evolved into the United Nations, and then things were fine-tuned and developed to make sure that most of the member states are being consulted and being represented. But obviously, I think I have to agree with the Minister Muhammad Hassan when he said that, okay, we cannot allow veto powers to be exclusively exercised by countries that do not represent the consensus of the world, of the global international community. There should also be either there's a cap on the veto power, remove it completely, or you add more members into those that is able to channel the power of a veto. Because we've already mentioned this before, I think in the previous episode, the West is represented by at least 4 permanent 5 countries: UK, France, USA, Russia. But you can always argue that Russia's leanings were never pro-West, or it was always self-interested, or it also had Asian characteristics as well. And the only other permanent 5 member is China. How can China represent veto powers over the entire Asia? It's, in a way, when America tries to contain China, by allowing just China to have the veto power. In a way, it's an oxymoron. It's ironic. Provided you should give it to countries such as India or even other regional players such as Brazil, South Africa, or maybe even Indonesia. So we can have more representation and let it evolve that way. If not, then the UN is going to remain myopic. It's going to remain stagnant. I think there is cause for reform at a very fundamental level for the UN. And of course, this will take time. It will take a lot of consensus building. And not every country can agree to meet with each other to talk about this, but the effort needs to be made. And efforts were made before to take a stance, a collective stance. But I think at the end of the day, it's up to the, in a way, prerogative of the greater powers, whether or not they can acquiesce certain amounts of agency and prerogative to the middle powers or even the developing powers.
Yeah. And I think United Nations will go down as United States empire going declining as well. Is I don't think United States or France, whoever in the in the top five, would like anything to be changed. Status quo is as good as for them. Like why would it change? So and they can just reject any proposal to do so. So that's the oxymoron again that you mentioned. So that France, in terms of economy size now, it's minuscule in comparison to let's say for India, like, and in India it's not in the veto power. So again, this is as we see the alternative. Like we mentioned, I think also in a few other episodes about BRICS, how BRICS could, of course, now they're saying like this is not a challenge to United Nations, but it's there. The opportunity will always be there, and India, Brazil are all there. China, Russia, and as the economic changes, the trade wars is ongoing. Wars in the Middle East, wars in Europe. Europe declining very much for the last 5 years. And you mentioned how many are there in the veto powers? UK, France. So again, this is something that I think would be a change, but not in the next 10 years. Any other leaders, Adi, representative that you would like to highlight?
I think this one is more of a personal favorite in terms
All
of
right.
MVP. I mean, and I think it kind of builds off the point about you saying that the UN may not be fit for purpose anymore. And I think this comes from the speech made by Argentina's own President Javier Milei. We had a great time talking about him in a few episodes back. He was accusing the UN of like saying that there's a socialist agenda that the UN is cultivating its members, called on countries to sign up to a freedom agenda, and it was very fiery, and he's a provocateur in a way. Okay, let's admit it, and that kind of populist rhetoric really does get a lot of people riled up. Like this is challenging that status quo. In a way that kind of shakes up the foundation. I think, in a way, leaders. I don't think I've seen a speech like that so flamboyant since the speech that Muammar Gaddafi made at the UN. I think this is the same level. If any of you have not watched or listened to that speech, you really should. Javier Milei is really. I think we did say that he would have a very big footprint when it comes to international politics moving forward, and I think this was a way that he actually put that through. I think is his criticism of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, calling it like an agenda that's almost like a leviathan that seems to peer into every facet of life here, and this is developed. And well, he's a libertarian, so he's going to be obviously anti socialists, anything that seems to put the state, give the state any kinds of powers to administer or to control industries here. So he just went up and said, "Oh, okay, I think I'm kind of done playing nice here. You all are forcing us to adopt an agenda, which is in a way which is not to our benefit, but we have to carry other countries for this." So yeah, it was very interesting. What about you, Hafiz?
Maybe one representative or leader I would like to highlight here is, despite a very small country, is the El Salvador, the Nayib Bukele. Maybe for some people, El Salvador is just another very small country in South America. But to me, I followed El Salvador for quite a few years now because of the adoptions of Bitcoin as a legal tender. So, once in a while in the news, I've seen it. But Nayib Bukele is not just about Bitcoin. When he became a president, he fight criminal like no one else. He imprisoned a lot of people and even sentenced them to death straight away. So that's some Westerners media might call it very, very, very harsh, and he got a lot of heat from doing that as well. But looking back now, for several years, it's you would say he made the right decision. And in the UN speech the other day, he mentioned that we need the freedom of speech, and El Salvador, despite its small size, never imprisoned the opposition or always protected private rights, and they keep improving under his tenure. So this is kind of what so-called a lesson learned, Adi, from a country who I would say does the unprecedented in terms of, you may call it the El Salvador could succeed in that because of their their size. But the fact that he did that and so many other things that just fall into places it's because of his vision to see El Salvador would prosper in terms of economically and politically. And that's how we see his much loved president now at the age of, I'm not so sure, his early 40s, I guess. He's always slick back hair, giving press conference, looking always awesome as always, just like a guy who, going to nightclub. That's how he sees to me with his hair. And then he gives this very strong speech about his country's freedom of speech, that no one is imprisoned due to any restriction whatsoever. So he sees himself as a literal savior, even though El Salvador means the savior. So he is the image that El Salvador is envisioned. So he mentioned in his speech that El Salvador wants to continue the momentum, and he hopes others as well can learn, because he said the new dark ages are coming. I'm not so sure where he is, pointing this to. Like, I mean, Europe or Asia, definitely not Asia though, because Asia is going to be one of the biggest, most dynamic part of the world in the future. But maybe Europe, maybe in America, so where people, freedom of speech is under threat. So if you don't know much about El Salvador, it's one hell of a country to be, studied. And I would say as far as the Singapore of the South America.
Wow. I think I need to start looking into El Salvador as well. I think a lot of my attention really is not prioritizing that part of the world, other than the bigger entities, more like Argentina, Brazil, Chile. But yeah, I think when you were talking about El Salvador's president, I mean, I guess I get what you mean by the whole look that he has, very, very pristine look. Nayib Bukele doesn't play around. I've been having like one of those very relatable selfies that he took at the General Assembly Hall. I think a lot of things to pick out here. So, anything else, Haffiz?
I think that's it for this episode of United Nations General Assembly 2024, the 79th edition. And next up, we're going to go what we just mentioned just now, to the Middle East crisis. There's another thing, another episode, another development happening. And let's find out in the next episode.